Record on this
Oh, okay.
computer.
Yeah, so
Right.
just record
Okay.
and then we're good.
Great.
Right.
Okay.
I think it should
Hopefully-
still go to your Zoom, David, but
Perfect.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so I'll
All
share my
right.
screen.
Okay,
We'll
fantastic.
mute ourselves.
So why don't I do an introduction? Are we
Sure.
recording already?
Yes, we are recording now.
Okay, well, I'm very excited about this talk. We have with us absolutely fantastic Dr. Sam Cooper from the American University of Cairo. Sam works on a bunch of topics, but a lot of his recent work has involved science fiction and fantasy and the classical world, which I think is terrific because I love both genres. So, also very excited about today's talk, in particular, Black Panther and classical reception. Again, brings together a film that I really enjoy and an area that I like very much, and also think it brings together two areas of real interest and kind of broader interest as well. Let's see. Yeah, beyond that, I'd like to encourage everyone in the audience, there's a huge audience, to postpone questions to the end, but then we'll have plenty of opportunity to have a question and answer period. Okay, without any further ado, let's welcome Sam.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so this talk is about Black Panther and classical reception, considered sort of within the rubric of alternate history. This talk is based on a chapter that I'm writing for a volume on alternate history and classical reception. So that's kind of the rubric that I'm using. So race is quite a prominent theme in alternate histories, perhaps because racial history is in actuality so problematic and dramatic. Two of the most famous alternate history novels have race as a central theme. I mean, many of them do, but two particularly notable ones are Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle. It was made into an Amazon series, and it imagines a world in which the Axis powers won World War II and carved up the United States. In the Japanese-controlled Pacific states, where most of the action takes place, white people are subordinate to the brown-skinned Japanese, and so some whites artificially darken their skin, whereas in Nazi-controlled territory in the East, which includes the whole continent of Africa, white supremacy reigns with predictably horrible consequences for Black people everywhere. Ward Moore's Bring the Jubilee imagines a world published in 1953, imagines a world in which the South won the Civil War, and Black people in the South are emancipated but not given citizenship. The South, which is in this alternate history victorious, while they are treated much worse in the defeated North, where mass lynchings are common, and most Black folks are compelled to immigrate to Africa, Haiti, or South America. And numerous other alternate histories similarly imagine one of these two sorts of worlds, Hitler or the South victorious. And in all of these, of course, race is naturally quite prominent. So race is a prominent theme in alternate histories generally. Another important subgenre of alternate history imagines alternate histories of Africa, in which some Black Africans, at least, do not live out the tragic history of enslavement and European colonization. Alternate history works by Black American authors, as Brickler observes, are rather sparse on the ground, even in spite of the genre's relative popular appeal. There are a few such works, including Stephen Barnes' Lion's Blood, published in 2002, in which Black Africans colonized the United States and enslaved whites. And Nisi Shaw's Everfair, published in 2016, Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist and the Underground Railroad also have elements of alternate history. And there are news reports that an alternate history Amazon series called Black America is in development, but it hasn't yet been released. And that also, according to the reports, imagines an alternate history in which Black people are not enslaved, but actually the masters in the South, as far as I know. In any case, the most famous, I think, of this kind of alternate history nowadays is the film Black Panther, which is not, as far as I've seen, not often discussed exactly as an alternate history, but I think fits the criteria well enough, with its hidden civilization of Wakanda, a technologically advanced, ecologically harmonious, and socially cohesive realm in which Black Africans flourish, possessing ample power to resist the machinations of would-be exploitative white invaders, such as Ulysses Claw, and note the Greco-Roman name Ulysses, Odysseus. He's one of the main villains. However, in the film, the real threat to Wakanda comes not so much from white people, one of whom, I mean, in the film, the main white characters are Ulysses Claw, who was actually killed off quite early on, and Everett Ross, you see here, a CIA agent who acts as an important ally of the Wakandans after he's restored to health after nearly being killed by Claw. But the real threat actually to Wakanda, and the main sort of antagonist of the film, is the African-American Eric Killmonger, whose traumatic experience of growing up in and around racial discrimination in the United States leads him to want to use the resources of Wakanda to empower Black folks everywhere through a kind of extreme revolutionary violence. Excuse me. So the film Black Panther, of course, is based on a long-running series of Marvel comics about Wakanda and the Black Panther, first introduced in 1966. And Eric Killmonger is not the only African-American who generates drama in the series, in the comic book series. For example, some of the early jungle action comics about the Black Panther focus on Monica Lynn, who you see here, the Black Panther's African-American girlfriend, who experiences hostility from the Wakandan society, which is somewhat xenophobic when it comes to any outsiders. Unsurprisingly, given that the comics as well as the film were created by Americans, primarily for an American audience, Black Panther is a whole phenomenon, is in many ways more about African-American experience in relation to an imaginary, largely counterfactual or fantastical imagined Africa than it is about Africa per se. Fictional alternate histories about Africa are closely connected to, though of course not identical with, the revisionist historical movements concerned with changing the racist white supremacist narratives about Africa and people of African origin that accompanied and legitimized the Euro-American slave trade that began in the 16th century, the European colonization of Africa in the late 19th and early 20th century, and the discrimination and violence against African Americans in the era of Jim Crow and segregation. Of course, one need only read the news to see that such white supremacist narratives and the struggle against them persist to this day. I mean, just think of the current furor about banning the teaching of critical race theory, which is so insane, to ban that. Particularly pertinent for classics and classicists is the controversy over the ancient history of Africa and its relation to Greco-Roman history. In the field of classics, the most famous work of revisionist history here is certainly Martin Bernal's 3-volume opus, A Black Athena, the Afro-Asiatic Roots of Classical Civilization. Just as fictional alternate histories often derive from a total inversion of some crucial, well-established historical event, and imagine the consequences of this, like what if Hitler had won World War II, or the South had won, so on. So too does revisionist historiography, especially but not only in its earlier stages, often take the form of a total inversion of some established historiographical narrative. Following this pattern, Bernal critiques and completely inverts what he takes to be a narrative that began to be established in the 18th century, that Greco-Roman civilization was completely distinct historically and qualitatively from African and Asiatic civilizations, with sub-Saharan African societies and cultures being regarded as particularly primitive and even completely lacking what could be regarded as proper civilization, and argues instead that Greco-Roman civilization was derived almost in its entirety from Afro-Asiatic roots. Bernal's work, together with other historiographical work in a similar vein, evidently shares with fictional alternate African history, such as Black Panther, the aim of enabling Black and Brown people to feel pride in their cultural history. Of course, it should go without saying that there are many conceivable reasons to admire or simply study ancient African and Asian cultures other than their links, imagined or actual, with the cultures of ancient Greece and Rome, and that making too much of such links could actually reinforce a problematic sort of Eurocentrism, if you tend to think that Africa only matters because it's the root of European civilization, or some such thing. So Bernal's thesis was anticipated by the African-American intellectuals of the 19th and early 20th century, who participated in a movement known as Ethiopianism. Ethiopianism had both a past-oriented historiographical dimension, as well as a present, future-oriented political theological dimension. On the one hand, it aimed to show that ancient sub-Saharan Africa, which Ethiopia represented metonymically, had a sophisticated civilization that, first via Egypt and then via Greece and Rome, strongly influenced modern Western civilization, often citing classical authors to attest this. Classical sources in Ethiopianist writing are quite common and significant. And then on the other hand, Ethiopianists often advocated that African Americans return to their African roots by actually returning to Africa, bringing along with them what they saw as the beneficial aspects of modern American society, such as technology and Christianity. By doing this, they thought they would not be so much colonizers as restorers of a primeval Ethiopian tradition that had been lost or interrupted. The most concrete result of this African-American Back to Africa movement was the establishment of the state of Liberia, which in practice, unfortunately, replicated rather than corrected many of the problematic and ultimately destructive aspects of the colonization of Africa by white Europeans. Fictional fictional histories of African peoples flourished in the genre of African adventure fiction that became extremely popular in the late 19th and early 20th century, a genre exemplified by the many widely read novels of H. Rider Haggard, the most enduringly popular and influential of which is She, A History of Adventure. I'll say a little bit more about that later. Such novels are seldom discussed under the rubric of alternate history, perhaps because they do not exactly invert some well-known historical event. But since sub-Saharan Africa tended to be regarded by writers and readers of this genre as essentially devoid of any kind of real history, so to speak. However, the fantastical histories of, I mean, certainly wrongly, yet the fantastical histories of lost races hidden deep in Africa have much in common with other alternate histories. They're imaginary alternatives to an assumed lack of history. However, African adventure fiction by white authors, which are clearly the source of the kinds of racist African adventures prevalent in mid-20th century comics, to which the creators of Black Panther, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who were white, wish to offer an alternative, seldom actually contradicts the view of Black Africans as primitive and without real history. The lost race in She, for example, consists of basically savage Black people who are governed by a powerful, sophisticated white woman who turns out to be an incarnation of Isis, Aphrodite. So there's a major classical element there. One of the earliest works of fiction by a Black author that responds to the African adventure genre and its alternate historical dimension is Pauline Hopkins' Of One Blood, or The Hidden Self, published serially in the colored American magazine, of which Hopkins was at that time editor from 1902 to 3. And this novel has actually a lot in common in some ways with the film Black Panther. I'm not the first person to note this. There's a blog post by a scholar, Pinto, who briefly discusses connections between this novel, Of One Blood, or The Hidden Self, and Black Panther. The novel is now actually quite well known by scholars in African American studies, but far less known otherwise. It's very notable as a work of Ethiopianist alternate history that anticipates aspects of more recent and familiar works such as Black Panther. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of classical reception in this novel, which will shed some light on the classical sort of the roots of classical reception in Black Panther. So the plot of this novel, Of One Blood, turns on the gradual revelation of several hidden alternate histories. The story begins in Boston, where Royal Briggs, a brilliant but impoverished white passing but slightly racially ambiguous student of medicine and the occult, and his friend and patron Aubrey Livingston, described as a tall man with the beautiful face of a Greek god, who is the wealthy scion of an aristocratic Southern family, attend a performance by a group of Black singers from Fisk University. It's not long after the Civil War, and the concert celebrates the talents and culture of the newly emancipated Black race. A soloist named Dianthe Lusk entrances Royal, reminding him of an apparition he had seen before out his window, as kind of ghostly apparition. Some weeks after this concert, Dianthe's body, seemingly lifeless, is recovered from a train wreck. Aubrey, who, like Royal, is a doctor, and the hospital's senior medical experts pronounce the woman dead, but Royal manages to reanimate her by administering a special powder that he's developed in the course of his scientific research. As a reanimator of the dead through advanced modern science and occult ideas rejected by other mainstream modern scientists, Royal echoes Mary Shelley's modern Prometheus, Victor Frankenstein. Alive but unable to remember anything about her past, Dianthe recuperates in the home of Aubrey's fiancée, Molly Vance. Frequently attended by Aubrey and Royal, who soon desires to marry her. Although he has achieved scientific renown, Royal is unable to secure the kind of well-paying position that would enable him to support a wife. Aubrey offers one possible solution, a 2-year expedition to Africa, excuse me, in search of treasure, which would entail a painful separation from Dianthe, but make Royal a rich man. Reluctantly, Royal joins the expedition, leaving Dianthe in the care of Aubrey and Molly. After Royal's departure, Aubrey's villainy begins to reveal itself. During the period of Dianthe's amnesia, excuse me, both Royal and Aubrey hide their knowledge of her background, treating this Black woman who is very light-skinned, like Royal, in fact, white passing. They treat her as if she were in fact white. When Dianthe finally remembers who she is, Aubrey pretends that Royal does not know and threatens to expose her unless she submits to his adulterous desire. He says, quote, "To possess you, I am prepared to save you from the fate that must be yours if ever Royal learns your origin," namely that she's Black. After murdering his fiancée Molly during a boating expedition, Aubrey absconds with Dianthe to his ancestral estate in Virginia. Ironically, it turns out that Aubrey has known from the beginning another great secret, that Royal too is of Black origin. While seeming to act as Royal's patron, he has in fact been using this knowledge to undermine Royal's career, thereby forcing him to join this African expedition. Meanwhile, in Africa, Royal experiences unsettling apparitions that adumbrate the trouble at home. But he remains mainly focused on the goal of the expedition, which is to discover the great treasure supposedly hidden in the ruins of Merowe, the capital city of ancient Ethiopia. The expedition's leader, Professor Stone, possesses a letter written in Arabic that purports to describe the treasure's location. And throughout the journey across the vast desert, he adduces numerous sources, biblical and classical, to demonstrate the plausibility of a wealthy and advanced civilization having ruled Ethiopia in the deep past, kind of like Wakanda in Black Panther. Yet after months spent investigating Merowe's impressive pyramids, the explorers failed to detect any sign of treasure. One night, Royal wanders alone into Merowe's Great Pyramid and stumbles upon the hidden city of Telsar, which is really a kind of Wakanda, the refuge of a living remnant of the once great Ethiopians who welcome him as their long prophesied king, Ergomenes, destined to lead them out of obscurity to rule the world once again. Inscribed on a sphinx in the middle of the city is a version of Ecclesiastes 3:15 that proclaims the sort of non-linear view of time common to many alternate histories. Quote, it says, "That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past." So there's a kind of analogy between the plot here of One Blood and Virgil's Aeneid. Just as Aeneas must marry Lavinia, the Italian princess, in order to found the Roman Empire, so must Royal marry the Ethiopians' voluptuous bronze-skinned Queen Candace. That's how she's described. But he remains devoted to Dianthe, and with the aid of a marvelous Ethiopian device, that provides video images of events past and present in America. Think of the kind of fabulous technology that Wakanda has as a result of its vibranium. He discovers that she is still alive and Aubrey's captive. So Royal, embarks with two Telesaurian comrades on a journey back to America to save her. Meanwhile, Aubrey has tricked Diantha into thinking that Royal is dead, and that she is therefore free to acquiesce, however reluctantly, to his desire to marry her. A ghost named Mira, which is the imperative form of the Latin verb mirare, to look or marvel at, reveals Aubrey's deception. And an elderly Black woman named Aunt Hannah reveals something even more shocking, namely that Aubrey, Diantha, and Royal all are actually of one blood. The children her daughter Mira bore as a slave to Livingston Sr., a white plantation owner. Aunt Hannah had secretly replaced a dead child of Livingston Sr. and his wife with the newborn Aubrey, which is how the latter came to be regarded as white and the legitimate Livingston heir. Knowing now that both Aubrey and Royal are her brothers, Diantha tries to poison Aubrey, but he catches her and compels her to drink the poison. Royal arrives just in time to embrace Diantha as she dies. In her final moments, Diantha hears, quote, the chant of thousands of voices swelling in rich, majestic choral tones, which she perceives to be, excuse me, which she perceives to be the welcome of ancient Ethiopia to her dying daughter of the royal line. That's a quote. The Telesaurians compel Aubrey to commit suicide and then return with Royal to Africa. Royal weds Queen Candace and prepares to lead the Telesaurians into the modern world. So I know that's a lot to follow, but to make the connection to Black Panther, there's also a kind of family drama, generational drama, with the dynamic sort of Greek tragedy that's kind of underpinning both of these works, where generational trauma is kind of passed down and causes these various problems. Unlike alternate histories that are from the beginning clearly set in a fictional world different from the reader's normalized reality, Of One Blood dramatizes the gradual excavation of its alternate history. This mimics the process through which new archaeological and historiographical interventions, such as those of Ethiopianism, reshape the normalized narrative of the real past. In addition to writing fiction, Hopkins also practiced Ethiopianist historiography, publishing, for example, a volume entitled A Primer of Facts Pertaining to the Early Greatness of the African Race and the Possibility of Restoration by its Descendants, compiled and arranged from the works of the best-known ethnologists and historians. Of One Blood's fictional alternate history offers an imaginative mythicization of the claims and aspirations of Ethiopianism, and classical reception is one important means by which it does so. Classical reception figures in Ethiopianism generally both as a way of contesting certain historical claims normalized by the contemporary racial science of the late 19th century, and as an inspiration for future-oriented political action. And as Daniel Selden has observed, quote, much of the controversy between white supremacists and Black nationalists proved to be a tug of war over the identity of Egypt, and this in two diametrically different, though complementary ways. First, Whereas white supremacists claim that the ancient Egyptians were white. Quote, African American scholars claimed classical Egypt for their own. Mummy head for mummy head, he writes, image for image, they were able to counter white apologists with their own selection of archaeological evidence, and duly called to witness Greek and Roman writers of unimpeachable authority among white intellectuals, such as Herodotus, Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, Pliny, and Josephus, who described the Egyptians as woolly-haired or black. Some of these same witnesses, moreover, asserted that Ethiopians had originally civilized Egypt, while others claimed that it was Egypt which, in turn, first brought high culture to Greece. Armed with these attestations, then, African-American writers turned the scheme of cultural history currently promoted by white scholars upside down. Not only had Negro peoples created one of the great classical civilizations of the world, they had done so first and shared their achievements with Europeans who otherwise, left to their own devices, would have remained in a state of ignorance and barbarism. That's all a quote from Daniel Selden. At the same time, African-American proponents of Ethiopianism imagined Egypt through the biblical, excuse me, biblical lens of the story of the Israelites' exodus from slavery in Egypt. In this case, identifying the situation of Black Americans as like that of the Israelites, except that ironically, Black liberation would come about through an exodus from America, contemporary Egypt in this sort of scheme, back to the promised land of Africa. Ethiopianism then, again to quote Selden, unfolded as a chiliastic odyssey of the African from Ethiopia through Egypt to Greco-Roman Europe and then back again. Egypt to Ethiopia to Egypt to Greece, Europe to Egypt, America, and back to Ethiopia finally. This schema, at once revisionist and aspirational, underlies the narrative architecture of One Blood. But how much time do I have? I don't want to go over time.
I don't know. Maybe I think you're doing fine. Maybe another 10 minutes. Would that work?
Okay, sure, yeah. So several explicit classical references signal the novel's engagement in classical reception. The introductory description of Aubrey Livingston as having, quote, the beautiful face of a Greek god, initially distinguishes him from the also handsome but darker-skinned, racially ambiguous royal, in accordance with the view of ancient Greece as the ancestor of contemporary white perfection. This view, however, is soon called into question by the appearance of Dianthe, whose name means in ancient Greek the flower of Jove, or more literally Zeus's flower, Dios Anthe. So is Dianthe Zeus's flower because she is so light-skinned that she can pass as white, or does her name instead suggest a link between ancient Greece and her Black ancestry? The answer, in stark contrast to the assumptions of white supremacist historiography, turns out to be the latter. Aubrey, Dianthe, and Royal all possess unique physical beauty because they descend from the royal line of the Black Kingdom of Telassar, the ultimate ancestor of ancient Greece and its achievements. So there's within the novel, there's a long kind of discourse by this Professor Stone about the citing classical sources of various kinds to prove that Ethiopia, that ancient Ethiopia was in fact wealthy and powerful, in contrast to, again, the contemporary assumptions, racist assumptions of white supremacists at the time. So he cites all kinds of classical and biblical sources. to demonstrate this. And so, although his discourse reproduces these aspects of Ethiopianist historiography, the expedition's goal really is to just sort of plunder the place for treasure, like as if he were any sort of European colonist. There's one Greek novel in particular that's strikingly relevant to Hopkins' novel, and that is Heliodorus, an Ethiopian story. Heliodorus' novel is a kind of Afrocentric revision of the Homeric Odyssey, and tells the story of Chariclea, a woman who has much in common with Royal Aubrey and Dianthe. Born in Merowe to the Black King and Queen of Ethiopia, Chariclea has white skin, explained as the result of her mother Persinna having looked at a painting of a white Andromeda during intercourse. Fearing that she will be accused of adultery, Persinna sends Chariclea away, and the girl is raised in Delphi thinking that she is Greek. As a young woman, she falls in love with a Greek guy named Theagenes and meets a Greek-speaking Egyptian named Calisiris, who, through divinely inspired dreams, recognizes who she is and helps the young lovers to undertake a long, difficult journey from Greece to Egypt and finally to Merowe. Having reached Merowe as a prisoner of war designated for human sacrifice, Chariclea is at last recognized by her parents as their own child through objects given to her as a baby by her mother Persinna, and most decisively a Black birthmark. The Ethiopian king Hydaspes and Persinna also recognize the merit of Theagenes through various feats of strength that he performs, and approve the young lovers' marriage, making them heirs to the kingdom of Ethiopia. And Pauline Hopkins, we know, was aware of the Heliodorus Ethiopian story. She cites it in her primer of facts concerning Black history that I mentioned earlier. And there's many similarities between the plots of these two novels. Both center on a white passing character who turns out to be of Black origin. Let me see. So the conclusion of Heliodorus' novel imagines a kind of fusion of Greece and Ethiopia. The latter appears as a place both of flourishing natural bounty and of civilized society, in which the king and queen are guided by a council of wise gymnosophists, or naked sages. Yet the Ethiopians also have an ancestral custom of sacrificing humans in thanksgiving for victory in foreign wars, a practice the Greeks regarded as barbaric, and which in this case entails the sacrifice of the novel's heroes, Chariclea and Theagenes. The gymnosophists themselves declare this practice barbaric. They say, quote, "Neither can we ourselves approve of anything as barbaric as human sacrifice, nor do we believe that it is pleasing to the divinity." Yet they acknowledge that custom demands the king perform it. Once Chariclea is recognized by the tokens given to her by Persinna and her Black birthmark, the Ethiopian people demand that she not be sacrificed. And ultimately, they're both spared, and human sacrifice is abolished. So Hopkins' Of One Blood, along with also Black Panther, concludes with a kind of fusion of Africa and America. The Telesaurians' ancestral religion is a kind of Neoplatonism. based in a belief in one supreme being and reincarnation of the soul. But because of Royal, they end up changing their religion to Christianity. And the novel concludes with Royal, quote, spending his days and teaching his people all that he had learned in years of contact with modern culture. The alternate African history into which Royal has been subsumed is in this way melded together with the African-American religious tradition of Christianity and with the normalized history of modern culture more broadly. To conclude, Hopkins, Of One Blood, as well as Heliodorus, and also the Ethiopian story, is an important precursor of later fictions such as Black Panther that use alternate history to re-envision being Black as a source of pride rather than shame. Classical reception of various kinds is one of the key tools Hopkins uses to try to do this, thereby countering the white supremacist use of classical reception in much of the African adventure fiction by her white contemporaries, such as Rider Haggard. Nevertheless, Hopkins' strategy of glorifying Blackness via classical and biblical sources, together with her emphasis on the glorious future of Africa as being a Christian one, really exclusively Christian one, tends to obscure any really distinctive features of pre-colonial Black Africa, and to envision African Americans, not Native Africans, as the rulers destined to guide Black Africa to its glorious future, which was the idea that kind of took actual shape in Liberia, with very unfortunate consequences. Black Panther, in contrast, reimagines aspects of pre-colonial Black Africa as sophisticated, beneficent, and glorious, and envisions African-American intervention in Africa more as a problem than a solution, in the form of this Eric Killmonger character. However, Black Panther concludes with Wakanda intervening in the world, in America, in a kind of beneficent way, not in this sort of violent revolution that Eric Killmonger had envisioned, but a kind of whereas previously it had been a kind of isolationist territory, like Telesar, you just keeping to itself. The film concludes with T'Challa the king going to America and sort of committing to using resources of Wakanda to improve America and other places. So that's it. Thanks very much for listening. Happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
Yeah. Whoops. Thanks very much.
That was great.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Sam. All right, the floor is open. Yeah, Christina.
Oh, that wasn't a hand. That was just trying me to applaud with the emoji. Apologies. But no, I last year Dr. Murray did the classicisms class, which talked a little bit about that book. And again, I'm very intrigued and need to read it because I just kind of came in and would just listen. So I'm really glad to hear it and kind of hear, this other way of thinking about Black Panther and the reception. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought in the Ethiopica. That's a really good connection that you made there with the Pauline Hopkins and Black Panther.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Is that a text that, I mean, so you mentioned that In of One Blood, which is, as you were talking, I actually checked out the ebook. So I I have it now. I'm looking forward to it. Although I guess you gave me some spoilers, so I hope I still
Great.
enjoy it.
And
But
yeah,
no,
Jackie, did
yeah.
you gave a talk on of one? I think I remember seeing on Facebook or something that you had talked about this. I missed the talk.
Yeah. Well, Christina's referring to last year when I had my Black classicisms class.
Uh-huh.
I was on Du Bois and basically his contemporaries, right? And so
Yeah.
one of the lectures was actually on Pauline Hopkins. It wasn't on Black Panther. I didn't really connect it to Black Panther, or I might have off the cuff connected it. I was focused more on Pauline Hopkins and how her use of classics. So yeah, so you just
Yeah.
and then I have a student who's actually for this course this semester, she's doing Pauline Hopkins. So I told that's another reason why we need to have the recording, because she couldn't make
Oh
it.
yeah.
And this is precisely her project, is
Oh,
to look
great.
at. So yeah, so she'll definitely benefit from your paper,
Great.
your talk. It will be amazing. Yeah.
Lovely.
We've got a question from Elizabeth.
Oh yeah. Are there any other works of alternate history in modern media besides the examples you presented at the beginning? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I guess it depends on what you mean by modern media. I mean, there's a lot of novels. There's a kind of a whole genre of novels that imagine what would have happened if the Axis powers had won World War II. Likewise, there's kind of a whole genre of novels that imagine what would happen if the South had won the Civil War.
There's Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here.
There's the Philip Roth.
The
novel,
Philip
right?
Roth version.
I forget the name of it. Is that like the end of the
It's
world?
called Philip Roth is
Plot Against America.
Yes.
the Plot Against America.
Yeah,
but
right.
Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here is really, it's the same thing, but
Oh, okay.
he's writing it at the
that.
time, and it's so prescient. It's insane, right?
Yeah.
Because he's imagining what would happen if Roosevelt loses the election, but while it's happening. That's what's really scary, because he's so accurate about what it could be like.
Yeah. I mean, also, I mean, just the general genre of Afrofuturism contains sort of elements of alternate history. It's not often sort of described as alternate history. You hear the term Afrofuturism more, but Afrofuturism generally tends to imagine Africa as having various kinds of different histories than the ones that we would be familiar with.
Yeah, so a question I had, you mentioned there are a lot of classical references inside of One Blood. What would be, so what were some of the texts that, or what are some of the stories that it appeals to? And you mentioned some of them. So does it take up the Ethiopica, or like, what are some of the, I mean, are there lots of explicit, like, is there any discussion of classical literature, and like what kind of texts would be discussed, or what gets discussed from the classical world?
Yeah, I mean, the connection with the Ethiopica is more implicit than explicit. It's not not explicitly referenced. There's also kind of plot connection with the Aeneid that I mentioned briefly. But that also is really implicit rather than explicit. The explicit references are mainly in the, like I said, the description of Aubrey at the beginning as having the beautiful face of a Greek god, and Dianthe in the name, so the names of the characters.
And also the archaeologist there too.
Exactly right. The archaeologist mentions Strabo, I think Diodorus Siculus, various classical historians, to substantiate this idea that ancient Meroe, ancient Ethiopia was in fact very very powerful and wealthy, which it contradicts the view of, I mean, that, you know, when the travelers first arrive in Africa, they go through the desert, everything seems very poor, and one of the American characters comments on how there's no railroads, there's no steamships, it seems like there's no progress and so on. But you know, in fact, Royal then discovers this hidden this civilization that and so on. So that's the explicit references are mainly
Well, the Ergamenes too. I realized
Ergamenes,
after
yeah, exactly,
yeah,
right.
because that's the name of the Egyptian that sets himself up as pharaoh in opposition to Ptolemy IV when there's a rebellion in southern Egypt against the Ptolemies.
Yeah,
The Egyptian, the indigenous Egyptian is his name is Ergamenes, or that's a Greek name that he's given is Ergamenes. So that's another allusion,
yeah,
really recherche allusion there.
right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. For mentioning that. Yeah. And there's some, I mean, there's good evidence and some, I think, scholar named Noor Hussein has argued convincingly that that there's a connection between of one blood and the contemporary king of Ethiopia, whose name I forget, but this idea of Ethiopia as the country that you know, was unconquered by Europeans.
So Haile Selassie, you're thinking of Haile Selassie?
Yeah, I think that's exactly. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Is that what he would be, the contemporary guy? Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Anyway.
Especially for Ethiopianism, yeah, maybe you could say a little bit more about Ethiopianism. Maybe the students don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned, it, you know, had both this sort of past oriented and future oriented dimension. So both the idea that you know, ancient Africa, far from being this like primitive savage place, was in fact very sophisticated and even the source of you know, Greco-Roman civilization, Egyptian civilization, Greco-Roman civilization, so on. And then the future-oriented dimension was that this idea of Black Americans returning to Africa and sort of making that past glory, you know, re-establishing it in the future. I mean, interestingly, in some of the, I mean, in for example, Wardmore's Bring the Jubilee, there's, I mean, there was a weird kind of, in fact, in actuality as well, a kind of agreement between Ethiopianists and like racist white supremacists who thought, yes, Black people in America should go back to Africa and get out of the country, you know. So, and this happens in some alternate histories, like this is, you know, what happens, what Black people do. So there's a kind of odd, yeah, thing there. And I mean, for many people, of course, it was imaginary. I mean, a kind of fantasy. But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of the basic idea of Ethiopianism, as far as I understand it. And like I said, as Selden pointed out, Egypt plays this really interesting kind of role, because it's both, Egypt is both kind of you know, this iconic symbol of the past greatness of Africa, but in the biblical idea of like the exodus from slavery in Egypt, Black people imagine themselves as like the Israelites in bondage in Egypt, which was America returning to Africa to escape that bondage. So it's a kind of very, very interesting kind of double role there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Could you maybe say a little bit more about the connection of Hopkins to Black Panther as you see it? I thought that was a really interesting suggestion.
Yeah, so I mean, the most obvious connection is this Telesar, this hidden city as a kind of precursor of this idea of Wakanda, which is also a kind of hidden powerful civilization in Africa. But there's also the connection of the kind of family drama, where in Black Panther, Eric Killmonger is a descendant of the Wakandan royal line, who is brought up in America, and like royal, in fact, brought up in America, and sees the suffering, the poverty of Black Americans, and this is what, and his father then is killed because he's doing things, but it's a kind of political thing. And so anyway, he grows up and is sort of radicalized to want to use the power of Wakanda to kind of to liberate Black people everywhere, but in a very kind of violent way. He serves in the American army in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's I mean, and in this way, he's unlike Royal, who's not a soldier, but in a similar way, there's a kind of I mean, Royal's situation comes about through this sort of family, a kind of family trauma, where his mother is raped by the white plantation owner Aubrey Livingston, and so there's this kind of traumatic racial history that plays a role in both works. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful.
Any other questions or comments? I guess we're a little bit past the time.
This is really great, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
great. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks for coming, and I'll send the
It might end up in David's thing,
Yeah,
but if
yeah.
it ends up in yours, yeah, can you send it to us? Because I want to post
Sure.
it for my students in the
Yeah.
Black Classicisms class, because this is exactly the kind
Yeah.
of thing they should look at.
Extremely topical.
Yeah,
Perfect.
That's
Great.
Well, thanks very much, Sam. We really